going on for years and even for your government. But how close it to your heart or to the Prime Minister's heart?
Well, I think it's an important tax reform, probably one of the most important tax reforms. And I think such a tax reform is never easy, because you conventionally have a tax structure where the central government has multiple levels of taxation. State governments have multiple kinds of taxes. Then you have other taxes like luxury taxes, entertainment taxes, entry taxes, etc. Now to subsume all taxes of the center and the state, which also means that the center gives up its sovereignty to tax. The states give up their sovereignty to tax. They don't surrender it, but they pool this sovereignty together and said, collectively, let us have a common tax structure in the country so that an assessee is benefited, that there is a single assessment done, and then the center and the state can distribute whatever the collections are. Now, this has several political ramifications, because the pooling in of sovereignty is a big political change. The impact of this is that instead of goods being charged at various stages of production, there'll be a seamless transfer of goods across the country. And when you enter every geographical region, you are not taxed again. At every stage, you won't have to face the hassles. And finally, this leads to avoidance of evasion. There'll be no taxation on tax already paid. So that stops the cascading effect itself. That prevents evasion, as I said, and therefore it's a beneficial structure. It supports assessees, it supports businesses, it even supports small traders and manufacturers, and that's why they are so overwhelmingly in support of this. In short, India becomes one economic entity and a common market. Now the impact of all this benefits the economy as a whole. And therefore, to bring a change of this kind is obviously bound to take time. People have to ideologically accept it. Then people have to see that there won't be any procedural problems. Then you have to bring states on board. Then you have to bring the different political parties on board. And I think where we are reaching or converging today is probably seeing the best of Indian political democracy.
That's where the problem begins, because there are some manufacturing states which are very worried about losing their sovereignty. You know, for example, the TMC, they want a reassurance of, the replacement of the word shall with will. You know, even Tamil Nadu, AIADMK, for example, they're also saying a little unhappy. How do you give that kind of a reassurance to them? I mean, that 1% waiver of manufacturing tax, for example?
According to me, you see, the manufacturing states wanted some assurance in terms of 1% additional tax on interstate transfer of goods itself. Now, there was an alternative viewpoint that this was against the concept of a destination tax. And therefore, finally, we accepted that argument in order to work out a via media. And because that would have had a cascading effect itself. But don't forget that when the VAT was brought in, a lot of these fears were expressed. And ultimately, it was a win-win situation for all. It led to increasing the tax base, it led to higher tax collections, it led to more reasonable levels of taxation. So we've gone through this once. And I think when you get into a newer area, there will be some questions because of the imagination of what will happen in the event of an unknown.
So you want to give some kind of a reassurance to the state governments?
Well, the center has already put it in the constitution amendment that if any state loses revenue, it will be compensated for 5 years. And I'm sure such a situation may not happen at all, because the base of the GST itself will be, the taxation itself will expand, and that is enough to take care of it.
But there's also this belief that some of the BJP ruled states, for example, like Gujarat too, had problems with the GST because they are again worried about losing their revenue. And elections, for example, in Gujarat around the corner.
That's a legitimate problem. But again, don't forget, the states will also get now a share of service tax, which they were earlier not. So that's going to more than cover up for the loss of some of the states itself.
Okay. But Mr. Jaitley, are you worried of the political fallout? Because people also argue that it could give rise to inflation in the next 2 years. It's going to be closer to Lok Sabha elections, state UP elections, for example.
There could be initially, when you experiment a new system, there could be some teething trouble. But I'm sure as it settles down, it's a system which will benefit overwhelmingly larger number of people.
Okay, but, it's still a long way ahead. I mean, it's just a constitutional amendment enabling the GST, but what is your rollout time span?
Well, I think we'd like to do it as fast as we can. But then I have never believed that this is a partisan idea, because every political party is in power somewhere or the other. So everybody has to collectively implement it. Now, in the whole process of passing this constitution amendment, approving it through the state assemblies, reaching a consensus on various issues in the GST Council, preparing the draft model laws, getting them approved by Parliament, and in one case by the state assemblies, fixing the functional modalities, fixing the final rates of various items. Now, this all can't be done on a partisan basis. This has to be done very objectively with a larger consensus in the political system. And I think the whole idea now is to create that spirit after it is passed, so that we can expeditiously do it. I hope that we are able to do all this as soon as it is possible.
Okay, and finally, the Congress party really has given the biggest amount of headache. The party itself has been divided on the issue, but they also claim that this bill is essentially theirs. Any word for them today?
Well, I think this bill belongs to this country. The idea was mooted in 2003. In 2006, it was for the first time mentioned in the budget speech. In 2011, it was introduced in Parliament. Then it's gone through two successive governments. And finally, everybody collectively is reaching a particular consensus. And that is why I've always said that there was a great need for an overwhelming consensus as far as this bill is concerned. And I'm extremely pleased about the fact that we are slowly converging to that situation.
Okay. Thank you so much for speaking to CNN News 8.